of Duty just released an inside look at matchmaking. They published a deep dive white paper on the most heavily weighted factor, ping, as it relates to connection. So we're just going to go through the paper, read through it, and then share my thoughts as we go through. So they say the design of Call of Duty matchmaking is driven by our goal to create the best experiences for our player community. As part of our commitment to an ongoing conversation about the Call of Duty matchmaking process, we are launching a new series of white papers from our technology team that will further expand on how Call of Duty builds online matches. The first topic of focus in the Call of Duty matchmaking series is one of the most critical factors in the overall process, connection, specifically ping. The next white paper in the matchmaking series will detail the role skill plays in the process. This second white paper in the series is scheduled to post in June, following additional tests, data examination, and analysis from our teams. Here's a look at the calendar of matchmaking-focused white papers scheduled for release this year. Note, targeting timing may shift. Ping, live, now, skill, June 2024, ranked play, late summer 2024, experimentation methods, fall 2024. These white papers will complement additional posts planned for the Call of Duty blog throughout the year to continue the conversation about Call of Duty's matchmaking process. So we're just going to go through the full paper now. It's 19 pages, so maybe a bit long, but I'll do chapters. That way, if you want to skip through certain parts, you can. So matchmaking series ping, April 4th, 2024. Overview. The design of Call of Duty matchmaking is driven by our goal create the best experiences for our player community. We believe that getting matchmaking right for our players means they enjoy the multiplayer experience more, play longer, quit less, and have more fun. So that sounds like engagement optimized, right? But definitely not fun for me and a lot of other people who don't really care for the matchmaking, but I guess in general it's been helpful so far. On January 28th, 2024, the Call of Duty blog published a general introduction to the Call of Duty matchmaking process detailing several factors used to build online matches. For reference, this is the detail provided in the franchise blog. 1. Connection. As the community will attest, ping is king, but the community will not attest that because ping is not king. At least, not reasonable ping. They probably prioritize ping first, but their ping limits are definitely too high, in my opinion, for a first-person shooter. So ping is king for me would be like 50 milliseconds or below, but theirs is probably a couple hundred milliseconds for their max ping. Connection is the most critical and heavily weighted factor in the matchmaking process. 2. Time to match. This factor is the second most critical to the matchmaking process. We all want to spend time playing the game rather than waiting for matches to start. Yeah, that's true. But I spend probably just as much time waiting as I do playing. At least a couple minutes for every match, waiting in the lobby. 3. The following factors are also critical to the matchmaking process. Playlist diversity, the number of playlists available for players to choose from, recent maps and modes, considering maps you have recently played on as well as your mode preferences, editable in quick play settings, skill performance. This is used to give our players a global community with a wide skill range, the opportunity to have an impact in every match. I already went over that in my last one, that hidden skill matching actually doesn't really give every player an opportunity because they can't match by skill on the extremes because the extreme skill curves just don't represent enough of the player community, so they have to pull from other skill brackets as well to fill it out. And then basically how their team balancing works is they just put the worst players all on the best players team to try to even out a 50-50 win rate potential, but that makes it so all the worst players on the one team can't do anything because everybody on another team is better than them, and then the best player has to hard carry the entire team. Even though they're better as an individual than the players on the other team, they're not better than them as a whole, so usually it leads to lopsided matches where the best player has to do everything and the worst players can't do anything, so that doesn't give them an opportunity to make an impact. Whereas if their team balancing was more like just a schoolyard pick, where they split up the best players and split up the worst players on opposite teams, then at least everybody would be able to do something because they would have at least a similar skill match on the other team to fight against. Whereas if they just put all the worst players on one team, everybody on the other team is better than them and they can't do anything. Doesn't work. Input device, controller or mouse and keyboard. Platform, the device, PC console that you're playing on, and voice chat enabled or disabled. So this was all detailed in the last blog they posted. The publication of the matchmaking series, Ping, white paper launches the first in a series our team is drafting to expand information about Call of Duty's matchmaking process. Our next entry in this series will examine how skill plays a role in the process. For the purposes of this white paper, our focus will be on the core components of the most heavily weighted factors discussed in the franchise blog. Ping as it relates to connection and search times as it relates to the process of time to match. Ping, the round-trip time for data to travel from the player's game client to the dedicated server running the game simulation. Lower ping means a smoother in-match experience, as there is less delay in the game simulation. Search time, the time in seconds between when a player starts a match and when we provide them with a lobby to connect to. This system is designed to get players into a match quickly. We do not want to leave players waiting too long. Ultimately, any matchmaking factors trade off against one another, and we are constantly tuning our matchmaking algorithm to find the right balance. For example, using the above factors, if we spend longer searching for a match, we're more likely to find one with a low ping and skill disparity, but spending too long searching is a negative player experience and doesn't guarantee a better result. We must also take into account varying player populations across the world. It takes longer to form a game in a low population region like Antarctica versus a high population region like New York. We also have to adjust our tuning based on factors external to matchmaking, such as game design and evolutions in the broader internet ecosystem. Though this is not the focus of this document. To be sure we're providing the players with the best in-match experience, we pay close attention to a blend of matchmaking-focused key performance indicators, KPIs, such as delta ping, lobby, and match fullness, skill disparity, match outcome metrics, and search time, as well as more player-focused KPIs, including hours per user, HPU, lobby quit rates, player retention, churn, and player survey results. These metrics are not used directly as inputs to the matchmaking selection algorithm, but are observable outcomes that will tell us if our matchmaking approach is working in the eyes of our players. So yeah, the last blog, they said there was no engagement optimized matchmaking, and they're saying the engagement aren't inputs, direct inputs to their matchmaking, but it does determine whether they believe it's successful or not. So that would indicate they are pushing for more of an engagement optimized matchmaking system. This document will focus on the most important factor, ping. We will talk about why it is important, how data center selection works, how ping is used in matchmaking, and how we measure our success. It is intended for professionals building and deploying low latency multiplayer titles, and we hope it spurs greater discussion and sharing of approach among peers in the industry. Terminology. Dedicated server, a game server running in a data center. Delta ping, the difference in a packet round trip between a player's best data center and the data center they are playing on. Party, a group of one or more players playing together as an atomic group. Lobby, a collection of parties hosted by a dedicated server that are either about to play a match, in the process of playing a match, or in the process of finishing a match. Core MP, the classic Call of Duty multiplayer game modes such as Team Deathmatch and Domination with 10 to 12 players, as opposed to Call of Duty Warzone, DMZ, Zombies, etc. Playlist, a collection of game modes and maps. Tick rate, frequency at which a game server updates the game state. Data center, Battle Royale, the original mode included at Call of Duty Warzone. Matchmaking ping, Call of Duty uses a client-server model for hosting matches, where the client is the player's console or PC, and the server is running in one of many data centers around the world. The latency from client to game server is a significant factor in the quality of the player experience, so the Call of Duty matchmaking system aims to minimize ping as much as possible, while still finding a good match in a reasonable amount of time. There are two different values of ping when talking about game servers. One, the network latency from client to server. Two, the in-game latency, that is the time from client update to the server response while in-game. The in-game latency depends on the simulation implementation and tick rate in the game server, as well as the frame rate of the client, and so is beyond the control of the matchmaking system. The matchmaking system aims to minimize the network latency and is the primary topic of discussion below. So it's interesting that they refer to the game session as simulation implementation. So basically it's just the server trying to predict what's happening based on all the different ping and all that kind of stuff. So it's not actually what's happening, it's what the server thinks is happening. So that's why sometimes the game doesn't seem to work the way that it should, where it's like bullets not counting or people teleporting around and dying instantly, that kind of stuff, because it's a simulation. It's not a one-to-one experience due to data travel time and all that kind of stuff. So if the simulation is not very good, then the experience is going to be terrible and not representative of what you're experiencing on your screen. So they have to get that right, but that may be part of the problem with Call of Duty and many multiplayer games in general. The simulation just doesn't accurately represent what you're seeing on screen. Interesting that they call it that though. Impact of ping on players. As the server runs the game simulation, players' actions are not complete until they have been sent to the server, processed, and the client has been updated with the new game state. The total duration of this process consists of the network latency and the simulation tick time in the server and the client. Higher network latency will increase the delay for the client. First-person action games like Call of Duty are particularly sensitive to latency. In a turn-based game, a latency of 200 milliseconds would not be a problem, but in Call of Duty this would be considered a poor experience, and the player could be at a disadvantage compared to players with lower pings. Call of Duty netcode aims to reduce the perceived impact of latency, but it can't eliminate it. High pings can cause anomalies such as other players warping or teleporting, or apparently accurate shots missing the target. This can cause a frustrating player experience. Some players may be sensitive to even small increases in latency. So yeah, basically what I was saying there. So they're trying to reduce perceived latency. So it's trying to even out bad connections with good connections. So that's probably a lot of the problem with what people are seeing in the game. So should just try to reduce the latency, period, not perceived latency, because that may mean that they're making good connections not as good and bad connections better than they should be to try to even it out, which would not be good for players with good connections. So shouldn't be given disadvantage for having a good connection to make up for the bad connections, but I would assume that's probably what's happening. Searching population and matchmaking wait time. Any matchmaking system will take some amount of time to find a match. Fundamentally, this is tied to the number of players searching at the same time who have compatible search criteria. Matchmaking wait time or search time is not the full time window between the button press of the start search button and landing in a match, ready to play. Matchmaking search time is limited to the time between the start search button and computing as a resulting lobby to place a player into. This doesn't include the orchestration process of connections, the level load time, or any other overhead associated with actually getting a player into a match. These are all important things to consider about the user experience, but our focus here is on the matchmaking wait time. So yeah, the wait time is when it actually finds you a match, not how long it takes to load in and all that kind of stuff, which is what most people would assume. So I don't know why they had to clarify that, but a system with few constraints on matching and a high population may find matches within seconds, and a matchmaking system with strict constraints may take minutes. Yeah, so it takes minutes for me, so it has strict constraints, Call of Duty. Even a singular focus on ping causes search times that are non-trivial. Let's consider an example of 1 million online users in a game. In most games, players do not spend all their time in the core loop of matchmaking, playing a match, then matchmaking again. Let's say for our example, players spend about 80% of their time in this core loop, so our 1 million players are actually 800,000 in the core loop. Suppose the match takes 15 minutes to play. Ideally, the matchmaking time would be a short 15 seconds, as we want this to be far smaller than our time spent in a match. This means only 1 in 60 players are searching at any given moment, so 800,000 online players in the core loop are only 13,000 searching concurrently. These 13,000 searchers are split, in the case of Call of Duty, across approximately 40 data centers and about 40 playlist options in our core MP offering. This leaves on average almost 8 players that are compatible with one another during any given 15-second interval. Keep in mind, the average match size in Call of Duty MP is 12, so there isn't even a full match. The average of 8 is a drastic oversimplification, but it illustrates how even with large numbers of concurrent players, ideal ping isn't always practical if we want to match players quickly. So if that's the case, why do they have more factors like skill and all that? People just want good connections, so that should be the only factor if it's already adding to the matchmaking time. But yeah, they're never going to admit to that, so keep it simple, you know, that way people can just get into the matches. I don't want to wait 2 minutes just so you can find a better skill match when maybe you can't or maybe you can. Yeah, that's why people just want connection based. Everything else nobody really cares about. It overcomplicates the system too much and doesn't really add anything in my opinion. Players are not evenly distributed across all our DCs and playlist offerings. Team Deathmatch is very popular and so will have a faster matchmaking time. Other modes such as Hardcore, Search and Destroy will have fewer interested players, resulting in longer wait times and higher ping as a result. A similar idea also applies to DCs. Depending on the time of day, one part of the world may have a very high player count, while the other side of the world will have a very low player count. So if you're looking for a match at 3 a.m. local time, expect to spend more time waiting for a match and higher ping times to find compatible players. So yeah, the whole idea behind that is less popular game modes and less popular locations have a smaller player pool to choose from. That's why people use VPN lobbies. That's why people play at certain times of day or play certain modes to avoid the strict skill matching. So obviously skill matching isn't really working if people are finding ways around it because the matchmaking is limited the way it is. So there's always a way around it. People are always finding ways around it. So why they have it in the game, why they're so adamant about it, I don't understand. In games with strict rules on ranked matchmaking can take much longer. This is again driven by the population of available players. Talking the above example, even if a game attempted to match players within 25% of the player population in terms of rank, those million online players quickly turn in to 2 compatible players every 15 seconds on average. Add in the constraint of roles which may be played in a match, and the problem gets even more complex. Ultimately, this increases the wait time even further, or requires other trade-offs. We try to make matchmaking times as short as possible, and in practice this means the process usually averages about 30 seconds. Definitely not for me. Depending on the region, playlist, and times of day, this may be much faster or slower. Rank modes also have a longer search time, as their matchmaking is also constrained on player divisions. So yeah, I'm on the West Coast US. I used to play during peak times, but not so much anymore, to avoid the skill matching. And I used to play standard modes, but now I play modes that aren't as popular to avoid the strict skill matching. So that could have impact on why the wait times are so long, but I would rather wait longer and avoid the strict skill matching as much as possible. So there's ways around it, so people always find a way around it, no matter how hard they try to push it. Wait time is an important consideration when optimizing ping, as excessively long wait times will lead to players canceling searches or quitting the game. Matchmaking in Call of Duty is tuned to handle varying search volumes for different times of day and different regions dynamically. This system manages the trade-offs between search time and player ping. Identifying good data centers for players. Before considering how to match groups of players, we must understand what we are trying to achieve for an individual player. With a large number of data centers around the world, we could potentially place a given player into a match running in any of them. If we pick a data center on the other side of the world, then they will likely have a very high ping. Obviously, we would ideally pick the data center to which the player would have the lowest ping. To do this, we need some idea of the player's ping to the data centers. Call of Duty has in the past used IP-based geolocation combined with physical distance to give an approximation of expected ping. Physical distance to the data center doesn't always correlate with ping, however. This is because the internet connections between 2 physical locations are generally not in straight lines, and many factors other than distance affect the achieved latency. For example, physical features such as mountains or seas may prevent direct cable connections. In other cases, commercial considerations and various other circumstances prevent connections between neighboring countries, force longer routes than necessary, or add delays to firewalls, etc. Excuse me. The Call of Duty game client runs quality of service checks against all data centers when the game is started, and periodically between matches. This allows us to use real ping and packet loss data for each data center from the player's perspective. Given these ping results, we can identify the data center with the lowest ping for a player. We don't only consider matching players into their best DC. Other data centers may have very similar pings to the player's best data center. Often players have several DCs that are equally good from a player experience perspective. In cases where the search population is low, we may ultimately trade off ping in favor of finding a match quickly. For example, a player with a ping of 16 milliseconds to a data center in Germany might have a ping of 18 milliseconds to Holland and ping of 22 milliseconds to France. The first two will be effectively the same, and the next will be very similar, and a good option if using it reduces wait time or improves some other matchmaking criterion. Based on this idea, the Call of Duty matchmaking process aims to reduce the difference between the best data center ping and the achieved data center ping. We call this difference delta ping. So yeah, they use the example of 16 milliseconds to 18 milliseconds of 22 milliseconds, but in reality, I'm close to like California and Utah, so those should be sub 40 milliseconds, but a lot of times I get 60, 80, 100 millisecond ping, sometimes 200 millisecond ping, so that would be like Europe. So there's multiple servers in my area, but I rarely get that low ping that I should, so they're giving you a difference of 6 milliseconds, but in reality it could be a difference of 50, 100 plus milliseconds. Data center locations. A player's best possible ping is limited by the available data centers. The more data centers available in different locations, the more likely that a player will have a good ping to at least one. But a data center in an area with a low search population might not have enough players to actually form games. As an extreme example, a data center in Antarctica would give good pings for the scientists living there, but it is unlikely that they could form a Call of Duty Warzone match. Matching players with data centers. The matchmaking system creates matches consisting of sets of players which are assigned to servers in a DC. Given the goal of minimizing the difference to each player's best data center ping, while still satisfying other matchmaking constraints, how should we group players? One option would be to assign players solely to their best data center and have a separate queue per data center. This would work reasonably well for busy data centers and popular and low player count modes. But if you search for a ranked match at 4 in the morning, then you could have an excessively long wait time, or never form a match at all, when accepting 5 milliseconds higher ping could allow a larger pool of players to match. The more data centers you have, the worse this option gets, as you split the searching population even more. Another option is to select a set of players based on other matchmaking criteria, such as region, language, rank, skill, etc., and then try to assign that match to a data center. If we select the players solely based on criteria such as rank, then it is quite likely that they will not share a common data center with playable ping. A game could aim to improve on this by using matchmaking regions. Players either manually select a region or are automatically placed in a region by using IP generation or ping thresholds. The matchmaking system groups players without consideration of ping. Then the formed matches are assigned to data centers based on something like the minimum average ping of players in the match to the data center. This approach has two main downsides: poor optimization of ping within regions and suboptimal matchmaking for players close to the border regions. For example, say we have a North America matchmaking region and players searching in Los Angeles and New York. All these players in the same region and so match with each other, so the formed matches are likely to have players from both cities. To minimize the average ping, it chooses a server running in Dallas. This will typically add around 30 milliseconds of ping compared to the best data center. Data centers on the east and west coast are poorly utilized. If a player is matched into a data center on the opposite coast, then it will typically add around 60 millisecond ping. For the border issue, considering two hypothetical regions, Europe and Asia, players in Turkey could potentially use data centers in Europe or in the Middle East. By having regions, we restrict them to one region, so they have less population to match with, making other matchmaking KPIs worse. At different times of day, there might be more searching population in one region than another, possibly forcing players to manually change regions. The first issue, where we end up just using the data center in the middle of the region, can be alleviated by splitting the regions, e.g. into East and West and A, but this makes the border issues worse. Now players in the Midwest are forced into one region or the other. Call of Duty uses a different approach to solve this problem, which we will describe in the next section. So they list all these problems, but the main issue there is they're not giving players the choice. If they gave the players a choice of what they wanted, it wouldn't really be an issue. So if a player wants to pick only one server, then they know their matchmaking time may be longer. They'll just say that you may have to wait longer because you only have one server to search with, but you know you're always going to get the best ping possible in every match. Same thing with the regions if you wanted to select regions, that kind of stuff, but they don't give the players the options. That's the problem. Whereas players will get like geolocation routers to prevent them from matching to servers outside of their criteria. So like, what is that? NetDuma, where you can force the game to only select servers within a certain distance to where you want to be. But you shouldn't have to buy a different router outside the game to have a good connection experience. So if they just gave players the option, which a lot of games do, they give you like a server browser or a region select and that kind of stuff, so you never go beyond that. But it should just let you know that you're going to have to wait longer if you limit your search criteria. A lot of people would prefer that, myself included, if it means that I'm always getting the best connection possible. But they just don't give players the option, which is the problem. Acceptable data center backoff. The Call of Duty matchmaking system collects a large number of searching players and attempts to group these players into matches that satisfy the matchmaking constraints. Some of these constraints are fixed. For example, a player searching for the Resurgence game mode may not match with a player searching for Team Deathmatch. Other constraints are relaxed or backed off over time spent searching. Data center ping has a fixed component and a backoff. The fixed component is an absolute cutoff beyond which the search will not match. This cutoff can vary depending on the location and search population. For example, players in North America with good pings have a much lower cutoff than players in Africa due to the available search population and data centers. Well, that's just racist, Call of Duty. The backoff base constraint uses increments of delta ping over search time. The backoff steps used may vary depending on game mode, location, and search population. The matchmaking system does this to manage the differing population demands of different modes and regions. To form a match, all players must have a common acceptable data center based on their current backoff level. This time-based backoff generally means that when there is a high search population, then players will match quickly and will get their best data center, or one very close to it. If the search is waiting for a long time, this set of acceptable data centers will expand and the player may be placed in the data center with higher ping. So yeah, I see that all the time when I'm searching. It starts with like below 20 milliseconds, then says below 50, then below 70, and then below 90, then 90 plus, and finally finds a match 2 minutes later. So it's expanding the area over and over because it can't find the match that it wants based on all the criteria that it's doing. So if it wasn't using skill matching and everything else, it'd probably be a lot faster. You'd probably just get your best servers, but they're adding too many components to the matchmaking process. Overcomplicated, you know? After a match has been formed, it must be assigned to a data center. The data center to use is selected from the set of currently acceptable data centers based on each player's current backoff levels. Within the set of acceptable data centers, we pick the one with the lowest average ping. Matching algorithm. In the section above, we discuss the rules for matching groups of players, but not how these rules are used. In this section, we will give an overview of the Call of Duty matching algorithm and heuristics. A search in the matchmaking algorithm is either a party searching for a lobby or an existing lobby searching for additional players to fill free spaces. A lobby searching for additional players is treated very similarly to a party searching for a lobby, but it has only one acceptable data center as it will already have been assigned a dedicated server. The matchmaking algorithm runs on a fixed interval, typically every 5 seconds, or on all searches currently in progress. This progresses roughly in a series of steps. 1. Some searches are used as seeds. For some game modes, all searches can be seeds, and for others, a random subset of searches is used. 2. For each seed, an ordered list of candidate searches is found using a heuristic. This heuristic looks at a large number of matching factors, including physical distance, platform, control scheme, skill, etc. This keeps the computational complexity far lower than considered population at any given time, and has been found to have little to no impact on match quality. Yeah, right. Maybe for the general population, but definitely if you're on either end of the skill curve in the minority population, it has a huge impact on match quality. 3. A greedy algorithm is used to add candidate searches to a possible match for the seed, such that the matching constraints are satisfied, and a quality score is maximized for each candidate added. This is where the bulk of the matchmaking conditions are considered. 4. If a given seed finds a set of candidates that satisfy the constraints for all searches in the set, then a match is created, and the seed and candidates are removed from the pool of searches. The throughput of the matchmaking process is inversely proportional to the number of candidates considered for each seed, so finding a good set of candidates is important. For example, We could have 4,000 searches available for matching, 1,000 of those selected for use as seeds, 400 candidates per seed, producing matches with 100 players. As previously discussed, geographical distance is not a perfect approximation for data center pings, so the use of distance in the candidate heuristic may not provide optimal candidates for data center matching. In practice, with a large enough candidate set, it has been a good enough approximation. The heuristic can also consider set overlap for configurable fields. Call of Duty provides a quick play option where players can select multiple modes that they would like to play. Maximizing the overlap between the selected set of modes for different searches improves the matching algorithm's ability to find a common acceptable mode. Server capacity. Data centers may have a variety of hardwares, with different specs and configuration to accommodate the needs of the various game modes. Larger data centers tend to be located in higher population areas where there is a high demand for game servers. If the selected best data center does not have an available idle server for a match, then we will attempt to use the next best data center, and so on. If there is no available server in a common acceptable data center, then the player searches will be restarted. A separate system manages the number of servers running in each center to keep enough idle servers available for new matches. The matchmaking system is periodically updated with available capacity per data center so that it can avoid creating matches in a data center with low or no capacity. If none of a player's acceptable data centers have any idle servers, then a backoff request will be returned to the game client and it will retry after a delay. This is to protect the matchmaking system during major outages. This backoff may also be applied during a rollout of a new server in client release, where the game client does not match the currently deployed servers. So yeah, if it just goes back to starting all over again once it goes through all the data centers, if it can't find a match, it would make more sense to let players pick which servers they can go to. That way it doesn't go to the end servers that you don't want to play on and not find a match and have to go back through it again and take longer. So if it's only searching a couple different servers, it'll be a lot faster to find a match that's acceptable to the player than if you're searching multiple servers. If it can't find matches, obviously. Obviously, it finds a match faster that way. It's more likely to find a match that way, but higher ping, if you don't want higher ping, you don't want those. Monitoring and results. The ping achieved by Call of Duty matchmaking is monitored to ensure that players are getting good results. The location and use of data centers is also monitored to ensure that they are being effectively used. Whenever matchmaking criteria are added or changed, or game modes are changed, the impact of players' pings is analyzed. The primary focus of our attention is on delta ping, which is discussed below. We also monitor in-game latency, but as much of that time is outside the control of the matchmaking system, it isn't the focus of our attention. Ping measurement is handled by the game client. Each game client will take several ping measurements periodically to all of our DCs worldwide between games. This ensures the matchmaking system has up-to-date measurements for all players at all times. The matchmaking system then records these measurements as part of each search, which in turn feeds into our monitoring of each and every search in Call of Duty. Thanks to the large number of data centers used around the world, 94% of Call of Duty players have a best data center ping of 50 milliseconds or lower. The matchmaking system described above is effective in achieving good pings for players. 75% of players get results which are within 10 milliseconds of the best possible data center. 95% are within 20 milliseconds of the best possible data center. So they're saying that I'm in that 5% then? Great. The higher ping values in the distribution are generally from parts of the world with low search volumes or from off-peak times of day. Activision actively monitors delta ping regionally and across all playlists. Taking a snapshot of November 9th to 15th, 2023, just after the launch of Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3, we can see a breakdown of player delta ping below. The median shows the typical player experience in all regions. Much of the world has a 0 or near 0 delta ping. An important reference here is that a single server frame is 16 milliseconds, so the vast majority of players have a delta ping less than a duration of a single server frame. There are a few cases of large player count modes and a relatively low search volume in regions, like the Modern Warfare 3 Zombies mode in South Africa, where players are often matched out of their ideal region and DCs to play in other locations. We regularly see players in South Africa matching into European DCs to find matches for large player count modes. This data is used to inform our data center planning. So yeah, even in Zombies I always have high ping, so I don't really care because it's not multiplayer and it doesn't affect like person-to-person gunfights, but the fact that I never find good connections in zombies is kind of weird too. The below view is the 90th percentile of delta ping. This covers the worst case scenario for players. These are typically searches at unusual times of day for the player's region. This greatly constrains our options as we continue to pursue a short search time. Here you can see the North American and European players are still consistently matched into low delta ping matches. EU is still around a single server frame and increased latency, while North America varies far more. This is due to the concentration of population centers on the coast. As soon as it's necessary for a player on the East Coast to match into the West Coast, the ping will increase substantially. We see that here in the 90th percentile. So yeah, I would assume I get matched on East Coast quite a bit with my pings. Maybe like the mid, like Dallas and that kind of stuff too. But rarely is it ever a West Coast server. Because if they're monitoring the delta ping, not your actual ping, then that means it's the ping difference between your best server and the server you're on. So if your best server is 40 milliseconds away and you have a delta ping of 40 milliseconds, that means you're actually 80 milliseconds from the server. So if my pings are always 60 plus and my closest data center is like 20 or 30 milliseconds, that means they're like 80 or 90 milliseconds, which would be East Coast pretty much all the time. Many other parts of the world, South Africa, East Asia, and some playlists in South America, don't have a sufficient local search volume to create matches in nearby DCs during low traffic times of day. Ultimately, the best player experience for many of these players is found by matching them into other regions around the world. These regions, being geographically distant from the high population regions, force us to place them into higher latency games. The best example of this is perhaps Oceania, where the difference between playing locally and playing in a remote region is very clear. Most playlists, even at the 90th percentile, have a 0 delta ping at the cost of search time, but modes like Ground War are pushed out of Oceania and into other regions, often North America. This pushes their delta ping up substantially. So yeah, not only are you getting worse connections due to their matchmaking, but then they're also putting people from other regions who don't have available data centers into your region. So your ping not the best it should be, and then the players you're fighting against definitely not the best connection possible. So not a very good system in my opinion. Comparing Oceania and North America is also a great example of how search time and ping trade off against one another. Below is a view of 90th percentile search time by region and playlist. In North America, search times are kept 5 to 15 seconds faster than Oceania. We accomplish this by moving North American players during these low search volume times of day to nearby DCs, coming at the cost of some delta ping. In Oceania, there aren't a lot of good alternatives in their region to host matches. As a result, the delta ping stays low, but their search time increases. In the extreme cases, after we have failed to find matches in Oceania, we place them in matches in other regions, which comes at the cost of both search time and delta ping. This can be seen very clearly in the 90th percentile search time and delta ping for Ground War in Oceania. All the information is also used when considering future data center plans. Our goal is to minimize network latency for players. We use our monitoring data to look for sites that have good connectivity to a lot of players or that help close the gap between a large population center and a small one. By adding test sites to the list of data centers that clients ping, we can assess the impact on the whole population and make better choices about where to add capacity. For example, our data center in Bahrain was added as it has good connectivity to the most of the Middle East, as well as good connectivity to Eastern Europe, so it provides a link between these two regions. Another important dimension to consider when evaluating our success in providing a low delta ping to all of our players is skill. It's important that no matter the skill level of the player, we provide a low latency experience. Yeah, that's not true. Their idea of low latency is not my idea of low latency. Their idea of low latency is a couple hundred milliseconds, whereas mine is below 50 milliseconds. Anything above 50 milliseconds for a first-person shooter like Call of Duty is unacceptable. The visualization below breaks down our delta ping metric by skill decile. In it, you can see that our delta ping experience is highly consistent for all of our players regardless of their skill level. In other words, a player's skill level has no impact on the latency experience we provide. Yeah, that's not true. That's not true at all. Unless they're trying to even it out by putting the majority of players in higher delta ping servers than they should be to make it look like the lower population skill levels aren't actually getting worse connections, which would be stupid, but that might be something they do to try to fudge the numbers, you know. Wouldn't be surprised. Summary: reducing ping is a challenge for all online games and matchmaking systems, and is particularly important for first-person action games like Call of Duty. Call of Duty uses a large number of data centers to provide local data centers where possible, and the matchmaking system uses a greedy optimization algorithm with an acceptable data center backoff to minimize the delta ping for players, subject to the limits of available search population. The ping achieved by the matchmaking system is monitored to assess the effectiveness of our algorithms and the suitability of the available data centers. So yeah, that's the end of their research paper. They got some links down there, the references, and then I'll also provide a link to this paper in the description as well, so if you want to read through it either while going through the video or just want to read through it yourself, you can as well. So yeah, but yeah, in general, that's pretty much what I expected. Nothing really light bulb moment for me in there. It's all just the basics of what you would expect, but a lot of it is them trying to make it sound better than it is, when in reality that's not the case for a lot of players. So I mean, in general, it's probably the case for the majority of players, the casual players who represent the vast majority of the player population. So average skill casual players are the vast majority of players. I would say probably 60, maybe 70% of the population. So these type of things don't really affect them because they have the most players to choose from. They're not really limited by the skill matching and that kind of stuff because they represent the vast majority of players, whereas people who are in the smaller populations of skill brackets, these things tend to fall apart for them, like me. So it's unfortunate that they keep forcing these types of things, especially when they acknowledge that having all these different variables significantly can affect the matchmaking process and the ping quality and all that kind of stuff. So, but they're unwilling to change it, you know. I just want it to be based purely on connection, and then everything else, just leave it up to chance, you know. So honestly, it's not really going to affect the vast majority of players all that much, because the vast majority of matches will consist of a vast majority of average players, because that's the majority of players. So every now and then they might see a good player or a bad player, but it'll be pretty rare. Whereas with the strict skill matching, it just means that they'll never see them. So they'll never see a player who's significantly better, or they'll never see a player who's significantly worse. They'll just always see players around their skill level. So it doesn't really change it too much for them, but it does make a huge difference for the either above average or below average. So it definitely benefits the below average, because obviously they're going to have a harder time against the average majority, because they're all going to be higher skill, and the majority of their matches will be against the average majority. So they probably won't be able to do too much. So it makes sense that they would have a protected bracket for the below average, the far below average, and new players, which they always have. But now it affects the high skill above average players in a negative way. So good players would usually play against the average majority, so they'd be able to perform above average based on their skill level, which makes sense. So yeah, sometimes they would go off on the average players who are below their skill level, but that happens so rarely to those average players that it wouldn't really necessarily affect their experience, unless it was their first time, you know. If it was their first game on and they went up against a player who's much better than them and they just got dumped on, then maybe they would quit. But in most cases, that wouldn't be the situation, and that's only if they only went up against that one good player. So if there's only one good player in a match of 12 players, you have a 1 in 12 chance of running into that player, whereas you have a much higher chance of running into other average players. So you still should be able to have an okay game. You're not going to win those gunfights against the better player. So I think they overextended the impact that good players have on average lobbies without the strict skill matching, but without considering how big of an impact, a negative impact, it has on the above average players, always having to play above average lobbies with not as good connection quality, longer wait times, more cheaters because the cheaters are all sectioned off with the above average players, because cheaters who cheat all the time are going to have above average performance unless they intentionally like play poorly to avoid detection and try not to get caught. But the vast majority of cheaters are going to have above average performance, so they're sectioned off completely from the average majority with the good players. So good players are going to run into cheaters all the time, whereas if there wasn't strict skill matching, every player would have a chance to run into a cheater, but it would be so small of a chance that you'd hardly ever see cheaters. But since they have strict skill matching, above average players deal with all the cheaters, so they see them constantly, whereas the average majority probably rarely, if ever, see the cheaters. That's why there's such a big discrepancy between people saying cheating is out of control and then I don't ever run into cheaters. So average players probably rarely, if ever, run into cheaters, whereas good players run into cheaters all the time. So that may be an intentional side effect or may not be, but it's a terrible, terrible side effect. So it's good for them as a business strategy because it protects the majority of their players from cheaters, but at the same time it forces above average players who did nothing wrong other than be good at the game to deal with cheaters all the time. And that's not fair either. They're paying customers. They didn't do anything wrong. They're not cheaters, but just because they're good at the game, they have to deal with all the cheaters on a consistent basis. Whereas if they didn't have the strict skill matching, they would just rarely, if ever, see cheaters, because cheaters represent probably a small minority of players. And if there's no strict skill matching, and everybody matched with everybody, other than the protected lower skill bracket and new players, it would be a wide variety of experiences, you know. The vast majority of lobbies would consist of majority of average players, rarely sprinkled in anything else. So it will be a much better experience for good players without strict skill matching, but obviously good players are still the minority, and a lot of times good players will keep playing even though they're not a fan of the matchmaking and all that kind of stuff, which has been the case, but at the same time I think eventually the burnout gets to be too much and people just start quitting. So I think they're starting to see that a lot now, and I think that's why they're addressing the matchmaking. They haven't changed it, but they may be considering it because I think a lot of the good players are starting to get burnt out on the system. So they kept playing, hoping things would change, hoping things would get better, myself included, but eventually you just get sick of it and you just stop playing. And I think it's a lot harder to bring back players who quit because they got sick of it than it is to bring in new players. So to win back a player that you forced out, intentionally pushed away, is much more difficult than bringing in new players and trying to hook them in. So it makes sense to have strict skill matching for below average and new players, but it doesn't make sense for the rest because that's just going to push away the good players. And the good players are the people who grind the game, so that's the people who put in hundreds, if not thousands of hours. That's the people who make content on the game, all that kind of stuff. So if you lose those players, you're going to lose the vast majority of extremely dedicated hardcore grinding type players, because the casual majority doesn't really play a lot. They don't grind it out. They don't really put a whole lot of time into it. For the most part, they probably play a little bit here and there and then just move on to whatever new game comes out, you know. Whereas the above average players are the loyal people who keep coming back, who keep playing throughout the year, who put in the hours, put in the grind. So I was the same way. Ever since Modern Warfare 2, I bought every single Call of Duty and played it all year until recently. So Modern Warfare 2019, I got sick of that game. At least it had ground war with no skill matching, but eventually they added skill matching to ground war there, so that was the only mode that I played. But after that, I didn't buy anymore. I didn't buy, what was it, Cold War, Black Ops Cold War. I didn't buy Vanguard. I did buy Modern Warfare 2, which I wasn't happy with. I only played basically Invasion with bots and stuff, but I didn't play nearly as much as I played other games as well in the past. And then I wasn't going to buy Modern Warfare 3, but my friends convinced me to buy it. That I don't really play multiplayer either. I play mostly zombies. Vast majority of my time played is in zombies, just leveling up guns and shooting zombies, and then Invasion again. So that's really the only mode I play, because all the other modes, strict skill matching is just way too highly tuned, and I just don't want to deal with it. So at least in Invasion, the skill matching varies every now and then. So every now and then there's matches where it's very hard, but every now and then there's also matches where it's not very hard. So there's variety there, and that's much what I prefer. So it does mean that I have much longer search times, but at the same time, my experience is much better that way. I would rather have longer search times and have a more casual experience than have short search times and have every game be a sweat fest where I'm having to play my very best, play at the highest level, use the very best guns, very best strategies, only to have around average performance. So the main issue with strict skill matching, I think, is that it's hidden. So good players have to play a much harder game. They have to play at their highest level, and they're still kept to around average performance with nothing to show for it. If it showed their skill level or some approximation of it saying, hey, you're an above average player, you're a top 5% player, you're a top 10% player, and you have average stats, then sure, that's fine. At least you have something to show for it. Whereas if all they show you is your stats, your win rate, your kill death ratio, that doesn't mean anything if it doesn't show your hidden matchmaking rating, because if they're trying to make every player have a 50-50 win rate and 1 KD, everybody's going to have a 50-50 win rate, 1 KD, whether they're the worst player or the best player, and there's going to be nothing to distinguish between the two. So that's really the main issue that I have with the strict hidden skill matching is there's no incentive to get better. There's no incentive to improve at the game. There's no incentive to be good at the game. You feel punished for being good at the game because you're being forced to lose more than you should by a system that wants to keep you down at a 50-50 win rate, 1 KD. So if you're an 80% win rate, 4 KD player, that's just going to stack the odds against you in such a way that you can't win. So you're going to win 50-50 and you're going to have 1 KD because the game's just going to punish you to keep you down to those numbers that it wants you to keep you at. So yeah, it's unfortunate a system that they want to use, but it's the way it is. So we'll see what they say in June on their skill white paper, but nothing new in this one. So yeah, let me know down in the comments what you think of their their paper and if your experience adds up or doesn't add up. But yeah, thanks for watching. I'll see you guys in the next one. Peace.
Good game, guys.
Damn, I only got a .6, so. I haven't made the